Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the third episode of the Reframe series. And this episode is going to be about chronic illness and disability within the South Asian community in the United States. And we're going to be interviewing Iman, who is a Bangladeshi American in her early 20s. She became chronically ill when she was in high school. Some of the conditions that she has include POTS, which is postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. And this is a condition that affects blood flow. It causes the development of symptoms, usually lightheadedness, fainting, and an uncomfortable rapid increase in heartbeat. It also has MECFS, which is chronic fatigue syndrome. And we'll get to learn a little bit more about her experience with these chronic illnesses and disability as we talk to her today. So excited to share this with you. Thank you.
One of the things that's made it most difficult for you to be vulnerable is the way that doctors have treated you. Could you share a little bit more about that?
Sure. I think it's just so misunderstood how, like, if you're not having a chronic illness, people assume, doctors are the ones that help you the most, and they're going to be the ones that get you through this. And I think that is true, but also they can be one of the people that harms you the most, physically and mentally. It can take a toll. A lot of people can get medical PTSD from just having bad experiences with the medical system, like being terrified of going to the hospital, seeing doctors, taking medication. And I definitely think that for me, that's one of the hardest things to voice, because people are almost like, oh, but doctors are there to help you. And it's like, yeah, they are, but they also did this to me, and I know it happened. And then when people like question it, sometimes I'm like, oh, should I have been okay with that? Maybe this is what everyone experiences. And then there's the other side of like a lot of my friends being shocked, just like, wow, a doctor did that to you? And I'm like, oh yeah, not everyone goes through this. Not everyone knows that this happens, and it's not really, I guess, exposed. Like, people don't really know that this is really common, actually. So I think it's difficult to be vulnerable about that because, one, people might not believe it, and it might make you feel more invalidated and like you're not telling the truth. And the second thing is that a lot of people may be shocked because they're like unable to believe it because it's so awful. And so there's two different ways to believe. And then the third one would just be like all the people that relate to it. That's just hurting me to like hear like, oh, I went through that too. Like, the amount of people who go through this, like, to hear that they connect with it just is like, oh, that makes it so much harder to know that there are so many people that feel this way and that have been treated this way. But by sharing it, I think it gets people to know that it's happening, and that also that they're not alone. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is really great that you're sharing. So just a follow-up question to this is, my friend Manu and I, we were just working on our last like kind of episode of the Rethink Desi podcast. And our discussion was actually around the fact that like a lot of information isn't specifically available about South Asians within the like made aware to doctors who and nurses. So when you're going in for treatment, they often don't really understand your culture very well. They don't like women, our experiences are often invalidated in general, and there is a gender data gap. But what could you speak a little bit more to that portion of it, like how maybe having these diseases and also being Desi adds another level?
Oh, yes, definitely. I mean, I think within the medical system and outside of the medical system, it really changes because there's so much stigma and misunderstanding in the South Asian community, um, that I think a lot of people don't think you can be young and have chronic illnesses, that, you're gonna heal, that, religion will cure this. There's like all these different, remedies that they think of. And yes, they can be helpful. I like know that they're one of the biggest things that doctors misunderstand is like, an anti-inflammatory diet. They'll explain like, oh, you should use like spices, you should use this. And I'm just like, so my food from my culture. And they're like explaining to me. I'm like, yeah, I know what you're talking about because I eat this in a very delicious way, unlike what you're telling me to eat. um, like that's kind of the white version of this food, and I will not be eating that. And it happens so often with doctors, especially like with the acupuncturists that I've met. Because it's like, oh, it's very holistic, have an anti-inflammatory diet, make sure you use turmeric. And I'm like, yeah, that's in all of our food. So I think there's like a misunderstanding of how, you know, yes, this is so good for our bodies. But also there are lots of people who have these conditions who do eat that. And it's almost like maybe you should be a little more aware of like where the person is from and what they may be doing already before like trying to explain their culture to them. Um, one thing that I wanted to say was I definitely felt alone in this because I have a lot of friends that are South Asian and like nobody really had any idea about these things. And one of the biggest things that helped me feel less alone was I think you may have seen the Instagram account Chronically Brown.
Yeah.
So I definitely feel like from like seeing that page and getting contacted to see if I wanted to be featured, like I definitely connected with a lot more people that are South Asian that have chronic illnesses and disabilities. And just the way that they're speaking up and saying that we experience this and these are people's stories, I think really helps me feel like, oh, there's other people that experience this. And I think it's really opening up a conversation for non-South Asians to see as well, because I knew this, but to see other South Asians and other people of other races even following this, like, I think it makes a big difference for how we're viewed. Um, and that changed my perspective because I did not know anyone else, South Asian or not, that had chronic illnesses, my age or not my age, not nobody like in my situation exactly. I might know like some distant members of other people's families who may have had some things, but nobody I knew directly. So I think that's one of the biggest things that helped me connect with and understand that we do go through so many things because we're just South Asian with chronic illnesses. It makes a big difference. And I think even some of the things they said, other people said, I didn't realize, oh, I relate to that too. I just never thought of it that way. So like there's so much, and I'd be talking to you forever if I went through that. But yeah, definitely Chronically Brown is one of the biggest things that helped me kind of understand myself in that way.
Yeah, that I thank you for sharing that because I mean I also follow them and I really
Mhm.
love them. But just the fact that you are sharing, like it makes me think it would be really helpful to kind of just recognize them as an organization for just
Yeah.
the work that they are doing and how they are helping South Asians, such as yourself and for me too.
Yeah, I mean, I found it to be very helpful to even share that page with family and friends and other people I know who are going through different things or not and just are supporting me or just to like I guess so they can, learn. And that has helped me a lot because I think people can relate to it more than they realize. Like some of my friends were like, oh, like I have this condition and like I never knew. And then they were like, this page helped me so much. Like, thank you for sharing this with me. And I didn't even know that it would help them in that way. So I think it's an amazing resource that has really changed my life. And I always try to bring it up because it's really what started things for me. I didn't really connect with anyone until I kind of saw their page and talked to them because I think with so many other people, I was kind of too different. There aren't many South Asian people that are represented in the chronic illness community, like in like the big organizations. And so I think having like a specific organization for that is really drawing attention to it. They also have their hashtag Desi-abled. That has also changed a lot of things, like how you share how being disabled and South Asian, what your experience is. And that's another thing that I think is making a difference for people.
That's really cool. Yeah, I love that you're sharing this, and definitely like it's so powerful, I think, just knowing that like an organization like that helped you so much. And I wish that those types of tools had existed when I was younger and like my brother and I
Yeah,
were going through this.
me too, because I feel like so many of the people I meet on there are way older and they're only now starting to like accept themselves. And I feel like it's been such a long time for me. And it's like, I can't imagine being, way older and just like going their whole life hiding this or, feeling not worthy and all those things. Like that takes a toll. And I can't imagine how many more years of that holding that inside you makes you feel. And so I think it's very important that, I don't know, I always hear older people saying, I'm so glad the young ones are doing this. And I'm like, I understand why they say this now because I feel like it'll help, the future generations and it'll help. It even is helping the older generations too. And I'm really glad for that. So yeah.
Go young ones. um, I'm really glad to hear you say that. So this actually is leading into the next question, which was, what social supports are helpful to you as someone with a chronic illness, and what do you wish that there was more of?
Okay. Yeah. For me, I think actually before I had my account and everything, one of the biggest things doctors told me to do was join like a support group. Um, so I tried that in person and it was really difficult because a lot of the people were like way older than me, didn't share the same experiences. So I found online to be more useful. There are plenty of groups you can join on Facebook. You can like contact people on Instagram. Like there's plenty of different platforms. I feel like I use a mix of Facebook and Instagram. And in terms of specifics, what really got me, I think, to make a connection with people outside of who I knew already and kind of like be more public about it was when I got my eating disorder, because I started connecting with people who were going through recovery for that. And that's when I really started to feel less alone. I was like, wow, like these people understand me. They may be from different countries, different cultures, different everything, but we have this in common. And I started recognizing that that is enough to have in common. We don't have to be exactly the same, but if we're having the same experiences with certain things, it can really bring us together from so far apart. There might be big time differences in all of these things. And so I would say the eating disorder community is one of the biggest ones for me. The chronic illness community, disability community, mental illness community, South Asian community too, because I've been really trying to connect with more people that are South Asian to just get more in touch with my culture. And I guess I never mentioned that. So I'm Bangladeshi American. And I really want to connect with more people because I feel like for a lot of my life, I wasn't accepted by other South Asians. I was either too American, I didn't speak my language. So it's nice seeing other people and just getting a different, there's so many different experiences for all these different communities and just learning that we don't have to be exactly the same, but we can still find what we have in common and that can be what we use to keep in touch. So I find that the community's mixed. Like I've met South Asians in the eating disorder community, disability community, chronic illness community, and that's really helped me to connect with all of it together. And I think that's probably the biggest change for me is because I never expected to find that feeling of, family with someone that I didn't know, with people that, were South Asian as well, because I was often just not included in that. Um, but I feel like when you have a disability and all these different things, like you're already so left out, people are just more likely to include because they get it. And so it doesn't matter if we're the same or not, if we're the same religion, culture, any of it. Like if we are both South Asian and we both experience these things, that's like enough because we know that those two things itself are discriminated. So that is the biggest thing I think that has helped me connect with people and what I do.
Yeah, I can only imagine, um, because I think there is such an added layer on. So like, I think in general, like without the chronic illness and all of these other conditions, there are so many complexities that already exist as a South Asian woman, trying to navigate this space in the US and kind of make it feel like home. And then on top of that, you have all of these other like subtle nuances that like add to it. And then um, I can imagine like just the layers of challenges and thought processes you have to go through each day when you're navigating situations.
Yeah.
So like that must get exhausting. And I just love to know, like, from your perspective, what are the ways that you wish that the Desi community would connect with you more, um, and are there things that you would push the Desi community to think about or do?
I think honestly, just recognizing us, because I find so many people I talk to saying that, they don't want to talk about it. They want to act like they're okay, or their whole existence is surrounded by only their illness. Like, I think having both, like, I think the Desi community tends to either ignore, pretend it doesn't exist, make it seem like it's less like, oh, they might have this illness, but they still need to do all these things like school, marriage, all these things, and like just dismissing it. Or it's like, oh, you have all these things, so these things are not possible for you and you're not worthy. And I think it's really important that we recognize that there can be both. Person can have the illness, you can recognize it, and I think we have to work on like how to kind of talk about that, have those conversations like you were saying. I think the biggest thing is just having the conversations, not avoiding it, really confronting the issues, and really, I guess, just talking about it, because I don't really even know people that talk about it. It's not mentioned. Like, I didn't even know people had these conditions because, like, yeah, like it's kind of not talked about, so I didn't talk about it. Even like my family members, like they're like, oh, like I deal with this, but I wasn't supposed to talk about it. I was like, oh, but like I know you. And so there's such a stigma, and I think just breaking down that and just knowing that it exists, because it's almost treated like it doesn't. Like it's, oh, this is like an American thing. You don't have this. You can't because, your sister doesn't, and it's like, well, there's so many doctors in South Asia, and like they do exist, and I think we have to accept that it's just part of life. And also, so much of it is like, oh, if you're not born with it, then you don't have it. But like so many illnesses and disabilities come later in life. And I think there's actually a higher percentage of that than people that are born with some of them. Um, for whatever reason, like there's so many that are caused by just trauma, and that's based on the person. And I think just accepting that a person isn't like less worthy if they have these things, and we have to talk about it, because by not talking about it, it's like dismissing the person, dismissing this whole group of people that exist and deserve to have attention too.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful that you say that. So this is like a follow-up question based on like my own personal experience, but have you ever had like friends or family members kind of stay away from you, or kind of otherize you as a result of your conditions? Like personally, when we were growing up, my I had relatives who lived quite close to us and maybe came once or twice a year, if they ever did, like because there was like this stigma around my brother, and it was like it's made me very like bitter and
Yeah.
like resentful towards them. So I'm wondering if you've ever had experiences like that, or like I don't.
Yeah. I know what you mean. I've had it in a different way, I would say, like more like I've lost friends because they just were like, oh, they just wanted to enjoy life and I was holding them back because, I couldn't do certain things. I needed to rest sooner, they wanted to go out longer, whatever. And With family, I think it's just like, a lot of them are far away from me, so they just like we were talking about, they don't really see me day to day. So they have a lack of understanding because they really just don't know. And I don't think they act like that with me, but it's sometimes it makes me anxious because it's like, oh, how much am I gonna have to explain? Like they haven't seen me in a year and so much has happened. Um, and I think it's hard because there's such a big push around like college and working and all these things, especially in the South Asian community. So like I feel like every time I meet someone South Asian, they're gonna ask me, "Are you in school yet now? Are you this now?" Like, and it's like once I say no, it's like they kind of dismiss it, like, okay, she's still not there. Like, I don't know what's gonna happen. Like, why aren't her parents concerned? And I'm thankful that my parents have actually supported me through that and actually helped me kind of get through it because it kind of affected me. I was like, oh, actually myself, I felt like I should be doing all those things. And I am holding my friends back. But I'm starting to realize there are people in my life who don't make me feel that way. And that's what I want to focus on. I am also very bitter just of how people are treated, not even just me, but like, oh my goodness, this pandemic just makes me so upset
Yeah.
because people just act, like I've had people say to my face like, oh, it's fine, like it just affects the vulnerable people. And I'm like, you're talking to someone who's vulnerable, right? How do you feel like saying that to my face? So like I definitely have issues with people misunderstanding. And I think I try to remember like a lot of it really is just that this isn't talked about. So people don't understand. They say the wrong things because they've been taught the wrong things and also haven't been taught anything. So they don't know what to do. They might not like be there because they don't know how to support you. They might not talk to you because they don't know what to say. And a lot of it is just because there are no conversations around it. So that goes back to like, we have to talk about it because like everyone's always asking me, how can I support you? And I'm like, we need to talk about that. And like, I don't know the answers because it's so like much pressure. And I'm just like now talking to other people, it's like we're starting to come up with ideas and I share those with my friends and stuff. But it's difficult if nobody talks about it. You don't have anyone else to talk to that relates to it. It's all on you to say like, oh, I need this, I need that. And a lot of the time you don't even know what you need. You just like need someone to just sit with you and just be there or just check on you and say hi and like not treat you like you're less. And that's pretty much it. It's very simple, but those are like the most difficult things to do because people always want to like fix your issues. Like, oh, do you need this? Do you need that? Like, how can I make this better? It's like sometimes I just need you to be here while I'm going through this, not necessarily fix the issue because it's not an easy fix. So I think that's what I would say.
Is there anything that you would particularly want to share, like in your advocacy, for um, for all types of disabilities
Sure.
within the South Asian community? Is there, like, this is like your platform, go for it, like whatever
Yeah,
you
I
want.
feel like there's a few terms that are like really important to me that I would want to share. Um, they're all kind of new to me, or not new, but like I'm learning more about them, and I will go through them. So I guess the first one would be ableism. There's so many things that well, okay, what is ableism? Ableism is assuming that, like everything is better if you're able to do things. Like, if someone's not able to walk, they're less worthy. If someone's not able to see, they're less worthy. And so like ableism is being like, oh, if someone's in a wheelchair, they can't do this. Or like it can just be a word too, like just calling someone deaf when they can't hear something, but they're not actually deaf. You're just assuming that, you know, I'm trying to think about how to explain this. Like if you call someone deaf, that's like, okay, you're insulting them in a way. And that goes back to how people think that people who are deaf are less worthy because they can't hear. So like why would you want to say that to someone? That's an ableist comment. That's like saying because they're not able to hear, it's an insult. It's like they're less. So things like that, I would say that's like one of the biggest things that is common is ableism, just like treating people as less if they're not able to do things. And this goes to disabilities, this goes to illnesses, like lots of different things. And I would say this is a term that a lot of people should research and learn about because it's talked about, but not like so much that you'll find it without looking for it. So I've learned a lot just from researching, and there's plenty of people who are talking about it who are really good at like kind of bringing it together, giving examples or like examples of what is appropriate to say. And I think that that would take up a lot of time. So like researching it would definitely be helpful. I think that's a term that's very important. Another thing that I would say is invisible disabilities and dynamic disabilities. These are things that I connected with because at first I didn't like referring to myself as disabled because I was like, you know what? I can do plenty of things. And it's not that disabled people can't, it's just that this society is built not to really accept us. Like, if this society was made and there were like different things around to help us get through, then we wouldn't feel disabled because it's more the society that makes you feel that way. You know, if there's like wheelchair ramps, then no, like you're able to do it, you know? It's just looking at it like there are many different ways to do things and all people are different. And if it's not really set up in a way that another person can, then they feel disabled. And there are a lot of different types of those. So I would say for me, invisible disabilities is when you can't see it. For me, an example is with migraine. I sometimes I'm in so much pain, so nauseous, I just have to turn all the lights off and go to sleep. Like I can't do anything. I just have to rest. That's all I can do. You know, that's not a disability that you would see. I just look like a person taking a nap, you know, but it's very debilitating. And I feel like that's not something that's talked about, but there are plenty of invisible disabilities, lots of different things that go under that, and lots of mental illnesses, depression, anxiety. You cannot see those. Like there might be happening inside the body, inside the mind, and maybe you'll see them crying, but that does not mean that that's the only time they're experiencing depression. So it can be very invisible. The other thing would be dynamic disabilities, which is what I was talking about. Like you're sometimes able to do things, sometimes not. So for me, I have chronic fatigue and I go through flares where sometimes I'm so fatigued, I can't even stand up. I can't even talk. So I get disabled in that way. But I'm not always like that. I have days where I'm just dancing around and that does affect me, but I'm still able to do it for a little bit, you know? And I feel like for the longest time, I didn't think I could say that because it was like, oh, well, I dance, I walk, you know, I can just move around and I can, you know, talk, I can do these and that. And it's like, well, you can be sometimes disabled and sometimes not. So I think that's like two, three, like those things are things that I think people need to know because where we look at disability as one thing, and that's just like people having a wheelchair, and it's actually the lowest percentage of a disability is people in a wheelchair, because how often do we see someone in a wheelchair? If it was only about that, I don't think people would even make that much, put that much attention on it, because it's like, oh, there's only so few of them, like why should we make a difference in society for just the few people who have wheelchairs? So there's so much more than that. It can be, you know, captions on um television to help people that can't hear. It can be braille on, you know, a elevator. It can be lots of different things. Our accessibility, and accessibility is another one, I guess. It's just making things accessible for different people's needs. So I think there's plenty of things that people don't realize go with disability and illness, and that it's more a lot more common than people think, and that we can do so much more for it, but also just to notice it and not look at it as like a bad thing is a big deal.
That was very powerful. Good job. Let's see. I guess, and this, I think this will be my last question, and then I'll open it up to you, like if there's any last things you want to share. Are there, so as someone, like a little bit of background on myself, I work as a data analyst at a research center where we are taking apart data around like racial inequities, gender inequities, trying to do disability data. And so I definitely like see in numbers that there are a lot of different types of issues experienced based on kind of your race, your gender, your age, your ability. And as someone who also grew up with a brother with a genetic disability, I know the value of like the social support mechanisms that were there that kept us going. Because as like first generation immigrants, it was like very difficult and challenging to figure out how to navigate everything.
Yeah.
What has your experience with that been like? And what is there like, yeah, like what kind of challenges maybe have you faced even with like things like health insurance, or not faced with health insurance, or um, are there social services that have helped you or hindered you? Um, those sorts of questions I'd really love to know.
Yeah. So I'm actually not like first generation. My parents came here when they were quite young, but um, yeah, there are different things like that. Like part of what I was talking about, because it's an invisible disability and all those things, like I really have to fight for, I have to have these diagnoses to get help. And that's why I try to fight for them. I'm like, it's kind of hard because you don't want to rely on these diagnoses, but without them, there's really not much help you can get. And sometimes with the diagnoses, you can also be treated differently. A job may not hire you, you know. Um, there's actually a big thing, which I did not know until recently, but like you can't get married if you have a disability and still keep your um, like help. Like, yeah, if you're married, like
Oh, like you're
it goes to
Medicare
like
or
your
Medicaid.
partner. Your partner is looked at as like your caregiver, and so now you don't need like insurance help and stuff, which like it goes away if you get married. I did not know this, but people are trying to change it. So there are things like that, which obviously I have not gone through that yet, but just like knowing those things happen, it's like, wow, that's like a big change. Like we don't really have a marriage equality then in America. Which I think people fail to know. I mean, I didn't know. And just like insurance is so complicated. It changes with the politics. You know, sometimes mental health is covered, then all of a sudden it's not. And it's so expensive. And I have to try and find some other, I have to search forever and try to find someone covered under insurance that is a therapist who takes it and will see me for like a long time. Because I'm someone who has chronic illness. So it's like I need a lot of therapy to get through this, not just like for a month and then that's all they'll do. So it's been difficult to find things like that. It's been difficult because sometimes medications won't be covered anymore. Um, in terms of like just the medical system in general, I would say the mental health side is just really hard once you're an adult. Because in pediatric, it was very different. I was able to get a lot more help. And then it's like, you'd think that they would help adults because there's so many adults who are struggling with it, but it's just so much more complicated. Like as soon as I turned 18, things changed. And I could tell that I wasn't going to be able to get it as easily. I would have to fight for disability insurance because like I'm not in school or working. So it would be great if they could help me with that, so things like that, which I'm still trying to figure out. Disabled parking, I just had to tell my doctor, like, hey, like, you know, um, I have chronic fatigue. And she was like, oh, yeah, you could totally get disabled parking for that. Well, for years, doctors had told me you shouldn't do that. You don't want to rely on that. But she was like, no, no, no. You need to save your energy. It can be very helpful. And you can get the permanent one. You don't have to get one where you have to keep, renewing it because this is a condition that you have chronically. And so, just I guess getting that help, it took time because one, doctors even view it like mobility aids, which can be a wheelchair. It can be so many different things. It can even be glasses if you don't have 20/20 vision. Like it just depends on how you view it. But those things are looked at as negative too. They're looked at as, you're relying on it. You should, try harder. And it's like, if you're sick, sometimes it can be very helpful to have those things. And it takes a lot of time to fight. Insurance wants to know certain diagnoses. It wants to know certain things so that you're able to have this many sessions with the doctor. You're able to have this medication. Like they need proof. And I think it's so difficult when doctors don't give you that proof. And when you have to fight for it to the point where they're like, why are you fighting so hard? It's like, well, you kind of know why. And then eventually a doctor will hear you out. And then maybe insurance changes its mind. So it's very complicated. Insurance is also just very confusing as a whole. um, I feel like it's just so hard to navigate. And as someone who's sick, who has brain fog, who has low like fatigue and everything, so taxing. Like the medical system is so difficult, but then when you're sick, it's like even harder to navigate it because you're not well. And sometimes it can be very hard to do that when you're at your worst and you need help because you can't even contact them. So I think a lot of those things have affected me and plenty of other people as well.
Yeah. Oh, this is so good. Okay. Because I remember going through all of this too with my brother. And like we had Medi-Cal. And so like literally every year there was like a scare where he would like essentially like if you didn't get the proper paperwork and you didn't get like 5 different doctors to sign off on the diagnoses, then it's like they would remove the Medi-Cal. And
Yeah.
so it's so like fucking annoying. Like, I'm sorry, like we already have so much to deal with. You're adding on this extra stress level.
I've heard so many people talk about it in this way, and my mom often refers to it in this way, but like having a chronic illness or any illness and disability is like a full-time job. You have all these calls to do. You have these doctor appointments. Like my friend's like, oh my gosh, it's like a whole day. Like you just talk to doctors, then you talk to doctors at an actual appointment, then you went to get the medication, then you had to like, I don't know, like do something else for your health. Like, and then you probably had to call a doctor to make a future appointment. It's like a whole-time job. And like, I don't think people view it like that. It's viewed as lazy, it's viewed as like weak, and it's like it takes so much strength to just get through that. And I think um like oh, I guess this is another thing I forgot to mention earlier, but there's like so many films that are being made about illnesses. And one of the biggest ones that also helped me with representation was this film about POTS. It's called Behind the Visible. And I heard about it like, I think a year ago, maybe a little bit more. And I ended up sharing it with some of my family and friends, and I saw it. And I feel like that's the first time I really felt represented on a screen, like in a truthful way. Like it was pretty accurate, and I think it was accurate for many different people because an illness is also not the same for everyone. That's another thing that people don't realize. Like you can have the same illness and have so many different symptoms, different experiences. And I just think that with that, I I forgot what I was saying. I like I could just tell like that's what is going on. And I see myself. I was like, oh my gosh, like this is me on a screen, and like it didn't look like me. It wasn't exactly the same, but I was like, wow, this is what I go through. This is very validating. And I think representation is so important of these things. And like it's so important. Like you just don't know that there's not anyone else going through it until you see other people going through it. And that's why it's so important for me, I think, to share with others and be like, yeah, you're not alone. And this is what's going on. And even sometimes I share something that I think nobody's going through. And that's like always the time where so many people are like, oh my gosh, I relate. And I'm like, whoa, that's so powerful. And I definitely think that those type of things can be really beneficial in terms of like how the people themselves in the community view it, and also people outside can get an accurate like representation to like support these people and understand what they're going through, because it's actually what we deal with versus like someone that wrote it that doesn't experience it. Yeah.
Okay, so last question is there anything that we didn't cover that you'd want to have shared?
I'm not sure. I think just making room for us in like, the mainstream. I think that's really important. Like when you see a chronic illness, when you see a mental illness or eating disorder, you might see like a straight white female, and that's not all the representation there is. And I think it's important that people are held accountable for not having other representation and that we are given the platform too, because we also are a big part of it. And I think part of why there's a stigma is because there's no representation. So that means that it must not exist. And so I think it's really important that people make room and that people use their voice if they feel comfortable. I know it can be dangerous even for some people to talk about these things. So the ones that have the privilege to and the safety to, I think it's important to have those discussions, whether with your family, friends, offline, online, whatever. I think just really making your voice heard is important, because that you never know who is out there that will connect to it and what it will mean to other people, and how maybe other organizations may not include, but like you could start your own, or you can connect with this one and you can fight for it or whatever. And like there's so many different things you can do. There's so many ways, and I mean everyone has their own way of doing it. But I think nobody is less worthy of that. I think everyone deserves a chance. And if anyone like wants to share their story, if anyone even has like a little bit of like, oh, I wish I would share this, or I wish someone understood this, I think just taking that leap, when maybe even if you just see someone else do it, can be really inspiring and helpful for others. And just, yeah, it can really make other people feel like, oh, we haven't been including this like race, we haven't been including this representation, and it's really important. And also like they might get in trouble if they don't. So like putting that pressure on them, like, hey, we're here, everyone sees us, so you really can't get away with it at this point, because we're gonna take over too. So I think like that's one of the things I would share.
Yeah, this idea of claiming your power, or standing in your power.
Yeah, and I think just like taking it back, like, oh, like we I think everyone feels like, they've been at the top for so long. It's like, well, we deserve a platform too, because the reason why there's so much stigma, so much trauma, all these things, is because like people are just not given recognition that they deal with these things. And it's like it affects everyone's health, when mentally and physically, when they're dismissed, when they're ignored, and when they act like it doesn't exist. So I think it's important that we are given a platform and that there is a space for that.
Thank you for joining us for the third episode of the Reframe series. If you liked listening or watching this, please give it a thumbs up, leave a comment, or subscribe. And thank you to my 2 Patreon subscribers, Tara and Vishesh, for supporting these efforts.